Okay, hi everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn and I run the various services at MedComsNetworking.com, which are intended for the global MedComs community, people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing. If you go to MedComsNetworking.com, you'll find lots of activities and resources, including links to places like NetworkPharma TV, where there's now over 200 videos, some of which have been generated by these Zoom meetings. We're running Zoom meetings at the moment and recording them wherever we can. It's a great way of involving more people from greater distances and in quite simple ways, so people can dial in, watch this, and then go back to work in an hour's time. So thank you, as I say, very much for joining us. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Eleanor Steele, who is now calling herself a MedComms Mentor.
Yeah.
Which is great, and she's going to talk a bit about what she's doing, but also importantly, the whole point of training within MedComs, which I think we should start off by acknowledging has got much better over the last few years. But Eleanor is involved in training people in MedComs, and particularly she's run a survey recently, which some of you might have joined in with. So we're going to hear the results of that today. So that's me. Over to Eleanor to take us through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, I will share my there. Can you see the presentation now? Super. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Peter, for inviting me to do this webinar, and thank you very much to everybody who has taken the time to join us in these slightly uncertain times. Today we will be looking at a few different things. I want to introduce myself and what I'm trying to do with the MedComms Mentor. I want to give you a brief overview of the training survey that I have just carried out. And I also have a few resources and things to discuss around optimizing current training, because I think that, as we'll see from the results, there may be some areas in which training in MedComs needs to be improved, and there are some easy things that people can do to do this. And also answering any questions that you might have about the survey results or other aspects of training. But I think the main objective that I have is really to encourage a broader discussion of training across MedComs, because I think there are lots of things that are changing at the moment. Everybody working from home might make a traditional training session a bit challenging, but things are changing across MedComs in other ways as well, not just because of the coronavirus. So talking about what's happening, why it's happening, and what that means for the industry and the people within it will be really important. So the first part of what I would like to do is introduce myself. I am Eleanor Steele. I've been working in MedComs for over 15 years now, and I've worked my way up the medical writing pathway. And for the last 8 or 9 years, I've been leading teams, including recruiting basically from scratch in one particular agency. So building the entire team, developing job descriptions and the career pathway, training the writers and editors within that team, looking at how the teams are resourced and run, plus obviously dealing with rather a lot of client work. And I've been working in a range of different agencies, including independent, fairly small agencies, right through to big agencies within large networks. So I've got a lot of experience of the different ways that different agencies handle training and what that looks like from both the medical writer side, but also the team leader delivering training side. So I wanted to think about what that actually looks like in terms of training within MedComs and what my experience has told me from the years that I have worked in the industry. So the first thing I think that everybody would acknowledge is that time is a bit of an issue. Nobody ever has enough time, and training is often one of those things that falls by the wayside. You can guarantee that whenever there's a full day workshop scheduled, that's when there's going to be a massive client deadline, and half the people who've signed up don't actually get to go. It's also a challenge for the people to plan and put together materials for training. but also for the team members to actually find the time to attend. Something else that is very challenging is that teams are varied. People have different levels of experience and different training needs. Some things come naturally to some people and not to others. And the actual jobs that people do will expose them to different types of projects, different types of clients, and that will lead to different training needs. It's hard then to do big sessions where you're training everybody on one thing because the training needs are so different. But individual training is very time consuming. Mentoring and on-the-job training are at the core of this, but doing this comprehensively is time consuming and challenging. Also, the skills and experience of the people delivering the training is varied as well. You don't always have the skills and experience to deliver the training that people within your team need. And the challenge of training somebody on something that comes naturally to you is actually quite difficult, because if it's something that you can do without thinking, how do you train somebody to actually do that? So there are lots of different angles to come at when it comes to skills and experience for actually delivering training appropriately. Then location. We're all working from home at the moment, it seems, but the spread of different locations within MedComms agencies is something that has been growing over the years. When I started, the agencies I worked for basically had one location and maybe a couple of people worked from home occasionally. But nowadays, most bigger agencies have several offices and multiple home workers, which makes traditional training very challenging. Priorities are always going to be led by business need. And this means that the things that people have to be trained on aren't necessarily going to match up with the ideal situation, because you have to make business-led decisions as to where you put your resources and your capacity. And then the resources themselves. Different agencies will have different internal resources. Some have graduate training schemes or internal academies. Others will have existing resources for training sessions that they've already done, which could be adapted, but some don't. If you're starting a team from scratch, then you're not going to have this resource set up. When I was in that position, I was looking at external training to support my time, because I obviously was fairly limited in terms of the time that I could devote to training, and found that external training resources were often really focused on soft skills like presentation training or time management, or quite general, like a general introduction to business development or strategy. And there was not really very much that was specifically for medical writers and what they would need as they progressed once you get past the kind of introductory medical writer stage. So this led me to think, if I'm going to use external resources to support my team, I'm going to have to do it myself. So this is really where the idea for the MedComms Mentor came from many years ago, when I was in a fairly challenging position. And over the years, I have put together some plans as to what I would like to access if I was a team leader running a team in an agency. And I've come up with 3 core elements to the MedComms Mentor. The first is obviously training. And the way that I'm approaching this is putting together bite-size training courses that will be on core MedCom specific topics that would be appropriate across all career stages within the scientific team. And my focus for this is online flexible courses, though I would be happy to do in-person workshops too, where this is appropriate. But everything that I do will end up within my online system. And everything that I put together will have a really practical focus, rather than just me dictating what should happen. It's around making sure that people have the internal tools and resources to actually put things into practice in the way that works best for themselves, rather than dictating one size fits all. Now, mentoring, as I mentioned earlier, is really key for career development. And this is something else that I will offer within the MedComms Mentor, obviously. And this could be for individuals or through agencies. And again, this will have a practical focus looking at specific objectives, because I think that's the most efficient way to work. And then the third pillar is consultancy. So I'm available to provide consultancy to agencies to help them build, train, and retain their optimal team to deliver on their business needs. So that's a little bit of an introduction to my plans for the MedComms Mentor, but are my experiences universal or are they unusual? Is this something that would be useful to people across the industry, or am I just a bit of an outlier? I thought the best way to find out was to put together a survey. I thought that having a general background section to get an idea of people's current situations and the companies that they're working in would be a useful upfront section. But then I split the rest of the questions into 3 different pathways based on whether people receive training, whether they deliver training, or both deliver and receive training equally. Once I put together the survey, I circulated it via LinkedIn. And Peter was very helpful linking to this and mentioning it in his newsletter. So thank you very much for that, Peter. And I was hoping to get a response of around 100 people. So first of all, thank you very much to anybody on the line who actually completed the survey. And I actually got 104 responses. So yay, I beat my target. So a little introduction to the people who actually completed the survey. I was interested in responses at Divide. And I wanted to see how long people had been in MedComms. I think there may have been a bit of a selection bias here based on who I'm connected to within LinkedIn, because obviously I've been in the industry for a while, so I'm connected to a lot of people who also have been. But I think there's still a good spread of different levels of experience here. And there's also a good spread of respondents from different sizes of companies and different types of agency, whether it's within a network or independent. So in general, I think we had a good range of different experience levels and types of companies from the 104 people who responded to the survey. So looking at the split between people who deliver or receive training, again, there's a range of different responses here. And I think that this split really reflects my experience of how teams are actually made up, given the proportions of people who deliver and receive training or would do both equally. So that was quite nice to see. Now looking at responses from people who deliver training, so just those 50 people who deliver training, this question is really key to what I'm trying to do. Do they have enough time to plan and deliver the training that their team needs? And the resounding answer is no for a lot of people. Some people say yes, which is fantastic, but there's clearly work to be done. Now, in terms of the types of training that people deliver and receive, this looks at the spread of dedicated training sessions in terms of the percentage of training that people receive. So whether it's a dedicated session or on the job. And while there's a slight difference between the people responding that they deliver training versus the people who responded that they receive training, there's quite a stark gap between the people who receive dedicated sessions as the majority of training, which is very, very few, whereas the majority have quite a small proportion of training delivered or received in dedicated sessions. I think this is fair, that on-the-job training has to be a significant proportion, but it's interesting to see the split that people gave. Now, whether or not the balance between on-the-job training and dedicated sessions is optimal is also an interesting question. There's a huge proportion of respondents who have said that they don't think that the balance is currently optimal for either the team that they are training or for their own personal career development. But I think this is something that really needs discussion across the industry, because on-the-job training and dedicated training sessions are going to be needed in different ways for different teams at different times. And people learn things in different ways. So looking at how this is working, where it is working, and what could be done to improve it is something that I think needs further discussion across the industry. Now, looking at the locations that people are working, as I mentioned earlier, when I started, a lot of people would be found working in an agency that had one office, and that's where everybody was based. Whereas I think you can see from this that there's a much bigger proportion of people who are working in companies that have multiple locations. And this obviously has an impact on how training can be delivered. This won't add up to 104 though, because we have freelancers who responded, and obviously they're only working in one location but aren't based in an external office. But this also has an impact on how training is delivered and received, because I think freelancers should be included in training, as well as people who work within agencies. And then one of the big topics of discussion around training at the moment within MedComms is the internal training provision. A lot of agencies are putting together internal academies for delivering training, or have graduate training schemes. But as we can see here, this is not yet universal. And I think it's something that is currently in development, rather than something that is up and running and completely sort of standard. So this is something that I think will also be very interesting to look at in the future, and for discussion around the way this is used, and how people are experiencing the different elements of training from different companies will be very interesting too. So in conclusion from the survey, we can see that there's been a broad range of responses from people in a variety of different situations. And the current situation is working for some people. It is optimal for some people, but there are unmet needs in a significant proportion of the people who've responded to the survey. So I think broader discussion is definitely needed. Now, I haven't had time, obviously, today to look at every single piece of data that has come out of the survey. So there are some other topics that I will be looking at, including whether training should be accredited, what topics should be included, and how this training is currently and could be delivered. And I have also received other comments that people very kindly submitted, looking at training in general. So these things I will be looking at in more detail, and I will have further data analysis coming soon on my website. So you can sign up for my email newsletter on the website if you would like to be informed when these things are coming out. So that's kind of a summary of the survey. Now, in terms of approaches to optimize the current training situation, I wanted to give a few little thoughts on how this could be optimized both for medical writers and also for team leaders. So starting with medical writers, the first thing that I would say is that while dedicated training sessions may seem like the best way to be trained, on-the-job training and good feedback is actually completely fundamental to making the most of your career development opportunities. And if you're not getting appropriate feedback on your work, badger people until you do. And for any team leaders out there, please make sure you give feedback on people's work, even if you've made the changes yourselves, because this makes a real difference. So when you receive feedback on your work, make a note of a key takeaway point that you can see will make a real difference to future work. If you're not sure what that key takeaway point should be, ask the person who gave you feedback, and think about how you're going to use it in the future. Is it something about how you've put your slides together, or is it about your storytelling? Think about those things when you're doing future work, and then check back against the key takeaways that you've made a note of, so that you can make sure that you are internalizing that feedback and it becomes second nature as you progress. And this is a really good way to make sure you don't get the same feedback again, because that can be a very frustrating note when you get some review comments back. So hopefully that will be helpful to the medical writers out there. But I've also got some advice for very busy team leaders who may find putting together training challenging based on the workload that they have. So I would recommend holding regular team meetings with your team to discuss training, because this helps make sure that you have some ring-fenced time that you can look at training, and include everybody within the scientific team, writers, editors, and people potentially with a hybrid role in your agency if that's appropriate. In those meetings, create a calendar of priorities for training, and if possible, assign at least one leadership role to every single person within the team, which really helps build skills in a broader way organically across the team. So people will have to do the organization, lead discussions, and then write up the findings from training sessions, which you can hold in a crowdsourced way. So basically, this involves having a meeting where everybody comes together to bring their insights and questions on a particular topic, rather than having one person, normally the main team leader, put together a whole training session and deliver it didactically. This means that you can really share insights across the team, but it also means that if you are going to do a future training session, you get an insight into the current level of understanding and the unmet need for that particular topic, which means that future training sessions can be much more targeted and much more effective right from the outset, which saves time in the long run. So those are a few little tips and tricks for optimizing current training situations. So hopefully those have been helpful. I would say to everybody, please do get involved in the conversation about training, because this way we can really improve the situation for everybody across the industry. And if you would like to talk to me or give me any questions or anything like that, you can find me in all the usual places, and here are some of those contact details. And I would really, really like to hear from you. So that is the end of my presentation. So I will hand back to Peter. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Eleanor, can we just lose the slide then?
Yeah, I am. The button was on my other screen.
Okay, all right, no, that's cool. Thank you very much. That's very nicely done. Thank you. I find the whole training question quite intriguing, and very often it's done, you know, an agency, if we're talking agency training, they focus on their own guys, and it's all very internally focused sort of thing. And I'm trying to, and the reason I'm sort of applauding what you're doing a bit is, you know, get more of a conversation across the business. And I think that's something that we really want. So I'm hoping some of the people who are listening to us will come in with their questions and comments. Just before, let's just remind them quickly that at the bottom of their windows, you'll have a chat button and a Q&A button. There's two text boxes. Please do send in your text comments, observations, and so on, and sort of feed the discussion. And we'll have a discussion for maybe 10 minutes or so about what you've done. And forgive me if I missed it, but a couple of things I just noted down there. Your 104 people, whatever it was, that was from across the business. Obviously, you explained that, yeah? Your focus is much more on the writing side at the end of the day.
Yes.
And what I wanted just to explore a little bit, and I hope I didn't miss it, but with the answers for your survey, were you getting a sense of whether people who were obviously overall saying we need better training, I'm not quite sure what the right words are there, but you showed that there was clearly a need for more training, but was there a sense of, amongst the writers perhaps specifically, since that's your focus, you know, there's two sides to writing, isn't there? There's writing, and a lot of people focus on the writing, can I write or whatever, as opposed to all the other skills that a writer needs, like, you know, being able to take a brief or being able to present or all those sorts of things. Did you get any sense as to whether there was any difference in satisfaction levels about the different sorts of training, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. So I have got data from the survey, which I haven't had time to present here, looking at all of the different topics that I could possibly think of that somebody might need to be trained on throughout MedComms. And there are some people who have been trained on each of these different topics. There are some people who have received basically no training on anything other than the kind of on-the-job medical writing training. And there are a lot of people who are quite interested in specific things like the briefing and reviewing that you mentioned, also things like client services for the scientific services team, because obviously we interact with clients just as much as the client services team, but in a slightly different way. And looking at how that can be optimized is something that people are very interested in. And also things like a financial awareness and commercial awareness, because obviously we're all working within the same business. We need to make sure that the business is working. And I think that the financial and commercial side is often really neglected for the writing team. And so when I have mentioned that in the survey, there's been quite a strong response from people within scientific services who do want to know more about things like that. And as you become more senior within the industry, then this is definitely much more of a high priority topic, because you have to input into budgets, you have to input into the kind of resourcing strategy and things like this. So understanding it from the ground up is really important.
Okay, and let's just tease out these into slightly different areas. So, and just cover it off, because we've got a mixed audience watching, and we'll ultimately watch the videos on. And I quite often get asked the question from the people who want to come into MedComms as a medical writer. You know, what can I do? How can I be qualified? You know, what are there courses of one sort or another that I can take or do in order to be better suited to be a medical? And my usual answer is pretty much there's not a lot out there. But from your perspective, have you got any signposts or help that you can give people who are looking to come in at that first stage? What would you advise them?
So the course that I have usually recommended to new people coming into medical writing, and it would be perfectly appropriate for somebody who is thinking about it and wants to understand the processes, is run by Stanford University. I think it's Introduction to Scientific Writing or something along those lines. And it's available through lots of different online course platforms. So this really gives you an introduction into how to approach scientific writing and things like that. It's not MedCom specific though. It's really kind of focused on looking at how to develop a good publication, and also therefore to interpret that and make use of the information that you're getting from different sources in an appropriate way. But in terms of specific training to approach MedComms, I haven't found an awful lot out there. I think there's more for the client services side. For example, Jenny Plant and her training program for account managers. That seems very similar to the kind of thing that I'm hoping to do, although obviously there are differences. But I couldn't find anything that was sort of corresponding to that on the medical writer side of things.
Okay, so one step at a time. So the newbie types, there's not a lot, and I would agree there's not a lot. Yeah. But having said that, you know, I always argue that when someone's taken on by a business, you're not expected to be a medical writer in MedComms terms. What you want is good writing skills. So there are universities and things will run courses on writing, and you've talked about Stanford and scientific writing and so on. But there's no magic sort of, you know, you can take this course and you're a MedComms medical writer at that stage. As you get into MedComms and you're in the early stage, and from a writing point of view, again, there's no sort of overall qualifications or courses that you can really take. I mean, EMWA run good courses, and some people do the EMWA courses. There are, but there aren't very many courses again. But having said that, the agencies tend to focus on, we can teach them to do the writing. And then it's interesting to think about, you know, the sorts of issues that you've raised. How do they deliver that writing and so on? Yeah. But have you got a view? And as you go up through the levels, that sort of, you know, the training develops in terms of what skills and so on. But have you got a view? If I can raise this one straight away, have you got a view on the idea of some sort of a community-wide, business-wide qualification? Is there any sense that there's any desire for it? if you move from one agency to another, is there any sense that it would be useful if there was some sort of benchmarking or something, or not? I just wonder what your views are on that.
I think this is something that needs to be explored. I'm not sure that there is a definitive answer out there at the moment. I think we are probably sort of too early to be able to say one way or the other, because there isn't anything out there. I think the only kind of proper accredited exams are the sort of CMPP kind of things. And that's very, very specific for people who are writing publications and things like that. So it's
just sorry on that point, we should clarify if people aren't understanding what we're talking about. CMPP is the International Society of Medical Publication Professionals, ISMAP's certificate, which is more about ethics rather than about writing. But if you're into publications, then that's the sort of thing that you could take. Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of a niche within a niche. So I don't think that there is anything that could even be accredited in its current form to turn into that kind of qualification. I think there are also quite a lot of nuances between agencies in terms of what they would expect people within different levels to be able to do and how they would approach that. And that to put something industry-wide together that would be kind of like an exam would be quite tricky at the moment, because there are a lot of differences.
I mean, and I would say that's a little bit the experience that I've had in talking to people. I mean, at one stage there was talk of an apprenticeship, sort of apprenticeship type scheme for medical writers. Getting the different agencies together around a common curriculum and all the rest of it is going to be quite challenging. I just still find the idea quite intriguing. And what's happened, I mean, from speaking as someone who's been around a bit, we've gone from a situation where there wasn't really not a lot of training. It was all just on the job and so on. MedComms was a very fragmented group. I mean, over the years, it's become much more a community. People come into MedComms as a medical writer now and see a career pathway. There's lots more learning and development opportunity, which is all good, but it's all quite agency focused. And I just wonder whether it will evolve in time into something slightly different. And I know there are people out there who sort of believe it is, but I think the practical difficulties are quite severe, to be honest. But come on, the sorts of the ways in which you deliver learnings, and Eve's asked some questions here about specifically running virtual. I mean, we're sitting here in the middle of the corona virus situation, like, well, make that explicit. So as I think you said, everyone's gone home, sort of thing, which just exacerbates the whole problem of people being in different locations. So online, I think we're just going to give everybody a big kick up the backside, as it were, in terms of using online opportunity. Just talk a little bit to Eve's point about how you have you got any some advice for that, more structured training sessions, how to run that sort of virtual training.
Yeah, so I would say that one thing that you would need to look at when running virtual training sessions, as opposed to the more traditional kind of big workshops or something, is to break them up. So if you've got people who are all dialing into something externally, it's very hard to keep people focused and interacting on training if you're doing something that's more than about an hour. And actually doing shorter, more discussion-based training sessions would be more useful, and then having them sort of spaced out, sort of taking them over a couple of weeks, so that people can really think about what they've been discussing and learning, and then trying to apply them to the work that they're doing and coming and reporting back, so that you can really kind of make sure that what's being taught is becoming embedded, rather than somebody just sort of listening to a session and switching off a bit and maybe checking their email or doing a bit of work in the background, which I think is a bit of a danger when you're having long training meetings, when you're not all in the same room and you can't actually see what people are doing. So
on that point, let's just pick that one up, because it's a bit of a soapbox of mine. So that what you're touching on there, I mean, if you use video conferencing like we're doing, and I've run a video workshop using Zoom, it was very straightforward, and I ran it for 2.5 hours, and I thought, is this really going to work? But we just approached it like we would if they were in a room. And we had a start time and a finish time. We had a break in the middle. It was a clear structure, and we just went with it. And actually 2.5 hours later, we all just went, well, that worked fine for what we were trying to do. Absolutely fine. But we were all on video, and we could see each other, and you can see if people are drifting off or whatever else, right? Exactly like in a room. And that's where I think video really works. If you use, people won't turn their videos on, in a situation like that. You know, who knows what they're doing? I mean, we've got a bunch of people watching us. We don't know if they're watching us or just off doing their emails and things like that. So some of that is about how you manage that sort of event type activity.
I think it's also about how many people are actually included, because if you have more than 5 or 6 people, then it's impossible to see everybody on the screen at the same time, and people can get a bit lost. So if it's with a big group, I would definitely recommend doing short and sweet regularly rather than one big chunk of time, because I think that means that people are more engaged and are more likely to actually kind of pick up on how you're trying to approach things and interact. I think there are also some tools that you can use to actually bring a training session to life. Things like Google Docs, where everybody can be working on something, and comments and changes can be seen live across everybody who's working on it, rather than just having something shared by a presenter. That's quite nice. And there are other things. Idea boards is a way of doing sort of flip chart work online for free through a Zoom meeting or something like that. So there are various different tools that you can use depending on what you're actually trying to do and how you're trying to get information across, or people interacting. So thinking about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and then finding the tools that will help you do that, rather than thinking, well, I'm doing a training session, therefore I have to present some slides, because that is often going to have people drifting off to their emails or other things in the background if you're not actually all in the room.
And also, just for what it's worth, I'm just thinking as you're talking there, I mean, it's a bit of an eye-opener today, for what it's worth, because I've got a kid at home who's been told to go home and use Google Classroom and just follow his normal timetable. And the problems he's having to work out what the heck he's supposed to be doing. And it's something that I think I can often forget. I mean, hopefully something like we're doing today, everyone's more than happy to sign into Zoom and see it. But as soon as you start to ask them to play with tools and do things and all the rest of it, the level of complication and the potential risk and everything just exacerbates so fast. And of course, again, you're not in a room together, so you can't, you might not actually see that someone's struggling with just how to click the right button or whatever. And if people are just working on their own, trying to follow what you're doing, you can very, very quickly lose them. And maybe I've underestimated that slightly. I'm going on a bit of experience this morning with my kid, but it brings it home to you that this is all fine and good, but people at the other ends of these online training programs, sometimes miss the point or miss what you're asking them to do and so on, and you don't realize it. And just as a practical problem, that's going to be something we're all going to struggle with, I think.
Yeah, I think it's something that you have to make sure that you have tested, and that you have a way of people flagging that something's not working, whether it's, system requirements mean that something's not going to literally function on their computer, or something's gone a bit wrong. And I think any kind of virtual space has to have some kind of flexibility for things like that, because there are always little challenges that you have to come across. But then there are always challenges in live training events too. And you often have to kind of slightly change course based on what's actually happening in the room. So I don't think that's unique to online training.
Just exacerbated perhaps. But your basic message would be blended learning, to use the jargon. I suppose that's the jargon still, is what we should all be thinking about, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And that making sure that people have a chance to actually kind of contribute and discuss what's being trained is really important, because that's how people learn best, rather than just kind of passively receiving. So trying to find ways to do that, even if you are sort of for example, filming a lecture and having people watch that in their own time, having somewhere where you can come together and discuss what's been delivered is a really effective way of making sure that the messages are actually getting through and people have understood.
I mean, certainly one of the, with NetworkPharma TV, I mean, one of the comments that's been made, and there is quite a good resource that could be much, much bigger. But, I've had comments about the fact there are already presentations in there where you can just go watch the presentation. because actually that's just easier for everybody rather than me doing it all the time. So you just go watch the presentation, which is online, but then come back into a room. So part of the plan is we then get together and we talk about it. But I don't want to stand up and keep presenting this thing to people when there's a video over there that you can go and watch, or indeed they video themselves and do the same sort of thing. I guess some of the agencies now are developing quite extensive intranet type resources and so on, and I'm making an assumption here. Somebody in the audience can say what they're doing, but they're they're building those internal resources and playing it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it will be very interesting over the next few years to see how that kind of thing develops, because I think it's quite there's quite a lot of talk about it, but seeing how it's actually implemented and how people experience it will be very interesting.
Can we talk just a couple of minutes? But we're running out of time again. This is my fault. But freelancers as a group, I mean, they have different interests and different requirements, I guess. But just any observations on that? I mean, again, online training and all the rest of it. There's not a lot out there really specific to the business. But for the freelancers, have you got any words of advice, or can you just take up that from how do freelancers get training in the first place? Should they be getting training? What can they do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my position is that everybody should be entitled to training that is relevant and helpful for their career progression. And I don't think that career progression should stop just because somebody goes freelance. I was quite surprised to see how many emails and messages I got from people who were saying, I'm a freelancer, so I just don't get any training ever. So quite a few people actually contacted me directly as a result of the survey to say they had no training and hadn't since they went freelance. And I think that's really sad. And that's one of the reasons why I want to do the MedComms Mentor, so that there will be training that will be appropriate for freelancers within MedComms, because I think there's a huge pool of people. And it's really sad that they don't have tailored resources that they can go and look at that will actually help them progress within their career. I think there's sort of broader things like skills around the science. There's a lot of Coursera, edX, things like that around the basic science and clinical aspects that would be useful for improving your understanding for particular disease areas. There's things like courses on clinical trial design, but specific MedComms focused courses are just not really there at the moment. So it's impossible for freelancers to access something that's going to be really relevant and help them progress in their own work, unless they can access it outside of agencies.
And the problem, part of the problem with the freelancers is that they're focused on delivery inevitably.
Oh yeah.
And they I mean, the flippant answer is, well, you've got to make time to go out and find this. But if it's not there for you to find, then it's a bit more of a challenge. Okay, look.
Absolutely.
Why don't we, we've gone on a bit longer as usual than I tend to. So what I'd like to do now is just wrap up this part of the session and then the recorded part of the session, and just say to everybody that obviously, Eleanor, you're happy if they contact you via LinkedIn or the website and so on.
Sure.
So do please follow that up. Everybody, the video should hopefully be later on NetworkPharma TV. There's a lot of other videos you can catch up there. Everything we're doing with MedComms Networking and more webinars and so on are all listed at medcommsnetworking.com. So do come back and join in again. But for today, I would like to just say a huge thank you to Eleanor, and we're going to give you a little wave as we stop the recording. So thank you very much.
Okay.
We just laugh
Thank
and
you.
wave. That's it.